Since the Sega Genesis Mini was unveiled at Sega FES 2018, I have been very excited for the system because I love the Sega Genesis. It was such a big part of my childhood growing up, playing all these classic Sega Genesis games, so whenever new Sega stuff comes around, I always look at it because I'm kind of a bit of a Sega fanboy. So we've done a lot of videos on the Sega Genesis Mini on this channel. Of course, during Sega FES 2019, we got a bunch of new information on the Sega Genesis Mini, that it was being done in-house by M2 handling the emulation, and M2 has been doing some phenomenal things over on the Nintendo Switch with ports of these Sega Genesis games, so I definitely had very high hopes and expectations for the Sega Genesis Mini. When the system was unveiled, we learned about 10 games coming to the system, but then we learned that there would be 30 more games, totaling 40 games on the Sega Genesis Mini. And we talked about those 10 games that were announced, so make sure you guys check out that video on it. But I also did a speculation video talking about 10 more games that I wanted to see on there. Well, Sega reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to unveil 10 more games this morning, and I was like, yes, please. Please let me unveil these games. And honestly, when I read over this games list, there were some games on here that I could not believe were going to be on the system, because I think there's a lot of big implications about what we could see on this. And some of the games that I talked about in my 10 games that I wanted to see on the Sega Genesis Mini actually made the list, and one of the games I thought had no chance whatsoever. So to say I'm excited is a bit of an understatement. So what are the next 10 games unveiled for the Sega Genesis Mini, and what do these 10 games say about the future of the Sega Genesis Mini? Sit back, relax, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's unveil 10 more games coming to the Sega Genesis Mini.
Hey, RGT 85. Hey, Sean.
Oh my god, it's Stevie Richards! So the way this video is going to work is, like I said, we have 10 games to talk about, and basically I'm going to start from the ones that I think we expected to be on this system and work our way up to the surprises, because yeah, there are some surprises that are going to be on this Sega Genesis Mini. The first game we have to talk about is a game that should come as a shock to no one that is going to be on the system, and that is Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Now I know what you're saying to yourself, we've all played Sonic the Hedgehog 2 a million times. Does it really need to be on the Sega Genesis Mini? And I say yes, because Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was the first Sonic game that a lot of us played. I actually played Sonic the Hedgehog 1 over at my uncle's house when he first got a Sega Genesis, but when I got my Sega Genesis 2 core model, that came with Sonic the Hedgehog 2. So that's definitely a game that a lot of us have very, very fond memories of. It's still a great looking and a great sounding game to play today. It's really fun, I feel, and it's just a game that needed to be on this system. So while it's not a big shock, while it was pretty much unveiled during Sega FES 2019 that Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is going to be on the system, I'm definitely glad to see Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on here, because you can never get enough Sonic the Hedgehog 2. The next game that shouldn't come as too big of a shock to anyone that will be on the Sega Genesis Mini is Streets of Rage 2. Now, of course, Streets of Rage was a flagship beat-em-up franchise on the Sega Genesis, and most people feel that Streets of Rage 2 is pretty much the pinnacle of the series, myself included. I think Streets of Rage 2 was a fantastic game. You had 4 different characters to choose from, you had excellent visuals, and excellent music. Once again, it's not a huge surprise that this is going to be on the system, but this is another local multiplayer game that you could play with a friend, and it's just great to see Streets of Rage 2 on here, because it's, once again, it's another Sega Genesis game that I feel everyone really needs to play. So Streets of Rage 2 is also confirmed for the Sega Genesis Mini. Another game we have confirmed for the Sega Genesis Mini is yet another in-house Sega game, and that is Shinobi 3. Now, Shinobi was a big deal in the arcades in the late 80s, and then of course we got subsequent releases on the Sega Genesis. Well, Shinobi 3 was a bit different than other games in the series because it was a bit faster. It felt a little bit more like Ninja Gaiden, and it was a little bit easier than other Shinobi games in the franchise. But I honestly really liked Shinobi 3. I think Shinobi 3 is one of my favorite Shinobi games because of the fact that it is a little bit faster. It has some really beautiful visuals, the music is really good, and the boss battles are absolutely awesome in this game. So once again, maybe not a huge surprise, but it's definitely great to see a top tier game like Shinobi 3 be confirmed for the Sega Genesis Mini. Next on the list is Super Fantasy Zone will be on the Sega Genesis Mini, and admittedly, I've never really played Super Fantasy Zone. I've played the original Fantasy Zone, but I've never played Super Fantasy Zone, so I'm actually looking forward to playing this game. I do know that it is a horizontal shoot-'em-up game in which you can move around the screen in different angles and different enemies come out and attack you. I know that it has really good visuals and supposedly a really good soundtrack, but once again, it's not a game I'm super familiar with, although Fantasy Zone is kind of a series that we have been seeing Sega bring back to the limelight as of late, so it's definitely cool to see it on here. I feel like a lot of people, myself included, aren't super familiar with this game, so definitely very cool to see this on there. Now, like I said, we made a video talking about 10 games I wanted to see on the Sega Genesis Mini, and 3 of them are now confirmed for the system. The first game that is confirmed for the system that was in my video is Landstalker. Landstalker, of course, is an action-adventure game with RPG elements, kind of like The Legend of Zelda with an isometric view, but it's always a game that I felt not enough people talk about because it's such a unique game that was on the Sega Genesis. You didn't really see many action-adventure RPGs on the system, games like this, so I always love to see Landstalker on there. I love the graphics in the game, the character models are so big, the exploration is really well done as well. Just a really cool game. The controls are a bit wonky when you first start playing it, but once you get adjusted to it, it's an absolutely fantastic experience. So one of the 3 games that is going to be on here is Landstalker, so I'm definitely very excited to see that on here. Now we start getting into the crazier games that are going to be on the Sega Genesis Mini, and one of the games that we have to talk about is Thunder Force 3. Thunder Force 3 will be on the Sega Genesis Mini, and this is an absolutely fantastic shoot 'em up game. It was one of the games that really pushed the Sega Genesis hardware, I felt. Just looked absolutely amazing. The gameplay was lightning quick. I really have only played Thunder Force 2. I've dabbled in Thunder Force 3, but I never really spent a whole hell of a lot of time with it. So I'm definitely very excited to see Thunder Force 3 on the Sega Genesis Mini. I think this is a game that's going to be very fun for a lot of people, and was a game that I didn't really expect to see on there, so it's awesome to see it on there. Next up, we have another game that was on my 10 games that I wanted to see on the Sega Genesis Mini, and it's another Konami game, and that is, drumroll please, Contra Hardcore. Yes, Contra Hardcore, or Corpse if you like to say it like that, will be on the Sega Genesis Mini. So you're seeing a lot of Konami love on the Sega Genesis Mini, and I really enjoy that. We now have Castlevania, Bloodlines, and Contra Hardcore on this system. Contra Hardcore is a brutally difficult game that I've never beaten. I've never even really done all that great in it, but it's great to see this game on the Sega Genesis Mini. This game, once again, had some really cool effects, almost some Mode 7-like effects in it as well. It was an absolutely beautiful game and just a really fun and hard Contra game. So Contra Hardcore being on here is definitely another big win, and this is the second game out of 3 that I wanted to see on here that was in my prediction video that is going to be on this system. Now the next 2 games I may have actually wanted to put in my video, but I wanted to keep it somewhat realistic, and I felt that there was really no chance for these games to be on the system because of licensing things, but here they are, and I'm absolutely stunned and pleased to announce these 2 games. But yes, Castle of Illusion and World of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, will be on the Sega Genesis Mini. Disney games on the Sega Genesis Mini, like how the hell did you pull this off, Sega? This is such a huge get because once again, these were games that I think a lot of kids did not play. I know when I was, 8 or 9 years old, I wasn't really into the Mickey Mouse sort of stuff. I was into Sonic the Hedgehog, this attitude and stuff, and Mickey Mouse was kind of for the younger kids. But these platforming games were absolutely fantastic. Great visuals, great soundtrack, great animation, and of course, Sega and Disney worked very hand in hand with a lot of these Disney games on the Sega Genesis. So to see these 2 games on the Sega Genesis Mini is absolutely mind-blowing to me. Castle of Illusion and World of Illusion will both be on the Sega Genesis Mini. And the final game, the 3rd game out of 3 that I wanted to see on the Sega Genesis Mini, was the last game I talked about on my video because I honestly felt like there was no chance that this was going to happen. I even said it in the video, I didn't even know who owned the license for this game anymore. It was going to be probably impossible for it to happen, but folks, Earthworm Jim. Earthworm Jim is going to be on the Sega Genesis Mini. Can you tell that the Sega Genesis Mini is not just a cheap, crappy plug-and-play little cash grab option here, folks? Like, to get Earthworm Jim on this system is an absolutely huge get. This is a system seller to me because Earthworm Jim is a franchise that nobody talks about anymore, but Earthworm Jim on the Sega Genesis was one of those games that pretty much defined the system, I felt. It was such a weird game. It was a gross game. It was kind of an adultish game, and to see Earthworm Jim get confirmed for the Sega Genesis Mini just absolutely brought a smile to my face. When I was reading this list of games that Sega had sent over, I was like, is this a joke? Like, you got Contra Hardcore on here, you got Mickey Mouse games on here, you got Earthworm Jim games on here, and like, that just leads me to believe that these next 20 games are going to be even more insane, because obviously if they're able to get these Disney licensed games, could we potentially see games like Aladdin on here, or The Lion King, like games that we thought had no chance in hell of appearing on the Sega Genesis Mini, all of a sudden have a chance to appear on the Sega Genesis Mini. And that's what makes me so excited for this system, because I'm just absolutely blown away at how above and beyond Sega is going in order to get games, especially third-party games. Like, let's be honest, first-party Sega games, we expect those to be on here. But things like Contra Hardcore, things like Earthworm Jim, things like Castle of Illusion and World of Illusion, nobody expected those to be on there. If you put Rocket Knight and Haunting starring Poltergeist on here, I will buy 2 of these systems just to support this system, because I'm just absolutely blown away. So yes, folks, those are 10 more confirmed games for the Sega Genesis Mini that will be 100% on that system. And I'm hearing that the next 20 games are going to be even more crazy as well. They've been telling me some things that, you know, if you think you've seen something, you haven't seen anything yet. So I'm definitely very excited to see what else Sega has up their sleeve with these Sega Genesis Mini game announcements. But let me know in the comments section down below what you think of the library so far. Right now we know half of the games on the system, and honestly, I'm more than happy with these games. I think it's a fantastic library. It's already shitting all over the PlayStation Classic, and it just looks absolutely fantastic. But let me know what you think of these games, and of course, what other games you want to see on the system. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. I'm thinking that Sega is going to give me the next 10 games as well, so we'll be able to reveal them on the channel once again. So make sure you subscribe so that way you can stay up to date on all the latest game announcements. And as always, guys, I will catch you on the next video. Later.